enlightenment is an accident, meditation makes you accident prone. I say the same thing for flow. It's like flow is an accident, meditation makes you accident prone. We can't force ourselves to go into flow. It's something we're almost invited into. It just arises as a state, the state of optimal performance, a state of immersion. And what we do know is that we can set the stage through mindfulness.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the Savannah Podcast. If you're like me, you love getting stuff done. I know I love working hard and achieving, and that is often hard to balance with a practice of mindfulness and meditation. Talking with us today is mindfulness teacher and performance coach Pete Kirchmer. He's going to tell us how to avoid burnout and perform at our peak through modern mindfulness techniques. He's going to show us how we can embrace this Buddhist idea of non-striving while still achieving our goals. I loved this conversation with Pete. We learn how to basically decode what he calls your stress signature and use a 3-step process involving resilience, focus, and flow to perform at your highest potential. We discuss intrinsic compared to extrinsic motivation, how to make your goals a mantra for your life, and how to even practice mindfulness while checking your email. So definitely stay tuned and do not miss this episode. It's full of performance-enhancing tips. Before I introduce Pete, I just wanted to give you guys a quick reminder to leave us a review here on iTunes if you haven't done that already. It means so much and it helps get the show in front of more people. All right, now Pete Kirchmer is the program director for the UC San Diego Center for Mindfulness and the developer and lead trainer for the Chopra Center Life Coaching program. He has a private coaching practice filled with high performers, including professional athletes, executives, and anyone looking to apply the practice of mindfulness to making healthy lifestyle changes. Pete, thanks so much for coming on the show. And every time I talk to someone in the mindfulness field, I always like them to define that word for us because I think it's kind of become a buzzword. So what's your definition of mindfulness before we get started?
Sure. Yeah, I'll actually frame it first. Joseph Goldstein is a mindfulness teacher, and he says asking what is mindfulness is like asking what is art. And what he means is that it's quite subjective and context dependent and maybe even preconceptual. So preconceptual, like an example of that is like I could say the words red, round, crunchy, and sweet. But if you've never eaten an apple before, those words don't actually give you a whole lot of wisdom. And so I can define mindfulness, but really it's this experience that we have of the present moment that's beyond concept or beyond definition or words. That being said, right, we need these structures and frameworks and definitions can be helpful. So it's been defined by people many times over. I don't have my own definition. I didn't see the point because there are so many brilliant people that have articulated it. Like one of my teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, in his classic definition is the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment to moment. He's known for his run-on sentences. So I typically unpack it too. It's like the awareness that emerges is this quality of experience. I liken it to the distinction between regular TV and high def, or if you have noise canceling headphones. It's like when you click on the noise canceling, there's that clarity that comes. So this is the kind of awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose. The on purpose element means that there is this gentle effort. There is an intention to be present. We are typically not present by accident, although there are certain conditions where maybe there is a certain degree of risk or an intensity or a novelty that calls us into the present moment without effort. Typically, just the day-to-day, we actually have to apply this gentle effort or this intention to be present. Being present obviously just means experiencing reality through the lens of the senses rather than being lost in thought, past or future. And then there is this quality to the way that we meet what arises in the present moment. So no matter what, if the objects in the moment are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, mindfulness is this attitude of non-judgment, or I might even say kindness, curiosity, compassion, that we hold all things with, maybe even equanimity, right? So that it's fundamentally okay, whatever we're experiencing, and that the moment just keeps on rolling by. So, now is a moment, and now is one too, right? And so this is always happening. So that might be more than you asked for, but that is, I would say, some framework for a definition of mindfulness.
No, I love it. And there were some great gold nuggets in there. I think, the TV going into high def, or how you also talked about it as art, something that's kind of not definable. That's a word. It makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I think comes up when we start thinking about how to really integrate mindfulness techniques into our daily life, this idea of non-striving, right? Like if I love the example you just gave, right? Each moment, maybe something's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, but the idea with a mindfulness practice is I'm in that moment with equanimity, right? Not judging, not striving to change it. I'm just with it fully present, right? But so many of us in the modern world, right? We're working at our desks, we're busy, we have jobs, we have goals. And mindfulness grew out of, correct me if I'm wrong, like Tibetan monk meditating, right? For maybe years at a time. How do you reconcile and help the people you work with reconcile this difference?
Yeah, so there's like an absolute and a relative level that we're talking about. So like on this absolute level, like there's no place to get, nothing to achieve, no one to be, right? We can just rest in awareness, and it's spacious and pleasant or quantumous. And on this other level, like you're saying, it's like goals are real. People have jobs, deadlines, they need to meet quotas, they've got kids that need to get to school, all these things.
And a lot of us love what we do, right? And we're like type A in a good way and like achieving things. So how does that like fit in?
This idea of non-striving, I've had to redefine it because I do work with a lot of high performers, athletes, dancers, musicians, comedians, executives, leaders, entrepreneurs. Goal setting is just what's happening for them. And so we look at non-striving rather than as being not trying to get any place or do anything, but rather as like this balanced effort, right? So I think of balanced effort on one hand, we can say is striving, which is this nail-biting, teeth-grinding, jaw-clenching, white-knuckling effort to make or force something to happen. It often ends in burnout or injury if you're an athlete. And on the other end of the spectrum, when we're talking about balanced effort, there's like giving up, kind of a learned helplessness. And the pendulum usually swings, one direction and then the other. And so I help my clients to use the body to check in and notice amount of effort they're exerting and how much they have left in the tank. And so when they check in and notice the sensations and symptoms of striving, knowing that maybe they're feeling exhausted or cranky, and it feels like an unsustainable amount of effort, then they know they need to back off a little bit and find that kind of balanced place that is sustainable. Or if they feel like they've given up, there's a hopelessness, right? They might need to press the gas a little bit more to refocus on their intention, remind themselves of their mission. And so we can redefine non-striving as more of a balanced effort towards whatever you're choosing to focus your attention on.
It sounds, as you're describing it, almost like using mindfulness as a personal check-in to see, like, am I revved up too high to 100, or am I being kind of lazy right now and at like 10%? Is that right?
It is, right? The body will let us know. And, it's easier when you have something objective like a check engine light in the car. But for so many people, like we don't listen close enough to hear the subtle rattle. We don't actually pay attention to the body until there's smoke coming out of the metaphorical hood, and then it might be like too late. So yeah, learning how to really tune into the subtle sensations that let you know that you're in or out of balance.
So when you're working with a high performer, whether it's an athlete or an executive, what are you telling them? How are you telling them to do this check-in? I mean, it's like, do we every 30 minutes have an alarm go off on our phone and like check in with our energy and effort or relaxation levels? Or like, what techniques are you giving these folks?
Yeah, good point. And so there's both like an intrinsic and an extrinsic signal to check in. And so like what the example you gave was a bell or alarm, which is an external signal. And so, yeah, you can set an alarm to go off every day at noon or every 30 minutes. And when you hear the bell, that reminds you that it's time to take a breath and just ask yourself, how am I? There's other external cues like transitioning from one meeting to the next and learning to make those transitions a mindful pause. I tailor it specifically to what's most relevant for who I'm working with. So when they need the check-in is we'll develop something for them. But we can also use the body sensations intrinsically to be a check-in. So one of my meditation teachers says that stress is the bell to awakening. And so when we can recognize our own stress signature. For me, it's like a heartbeat increase, or I'll start to sweat. It's not even hot out. Like that's an aha for me. Like, oh, pay attention. The body's telling you something. And that is my internal bell to pause, take a breath, check in, and then move forward, proceed.
I love this phrase, stress signature. I haven't heard that before, but I think that's a really great tip because we all, like for you said, the sweating, for me, it's like rushing, right? Anytime I notice I'm rushing, I know all of a sudden something shifted and I've moved into that stressful place. So it seems like you're saying for folks listening at home, it's like step one is sort of to get really clear about what stress feels like and shows up, how it shows up for you in your body. Is that kind of right?
Absolutely. And the body is where we'll feel it the first. So that's like the first place to look. But we can start to wake up to the signals of stress at a lot of different levels. So often people have very common triggering events. Whenever my kid does this, whenever my boss says this, whenever I feel like the inbox is this, right? So there are things that happen that can trigger stress, but then the body reacts to it. That's the stress signature in the body. Then there's also like the greatest hits tape of thoughts. And it's usually the same story that will play over and over again. And with the practice of mindfulness, we can start to recognize these repetitive thought patterns over and over and be like, oh, wait, I've heard that before. And then finally, the furthest down the chain, we can start to know how it is that we react unskillfully. So ideally, pausing and feeling the impulse to say something snotty or to shut down, those two can be the bell to awakening.
I love how you say react unskillfully. That's a very nice way to put it. So if people at home wanted to do some work around this, would you suggest me? I'm a huge journaling fan, so I don't know, but I'm curious to hear from you. I think we can all really relate to this idea of common triggering events, and like I call it too, like that top 10 on your playlist of sort of worries, fears, things that are constantly running through your head. Is it helpful to sort of write those out to help to make you more cognizant of them, or what other tools do you suggest to help people really laser in on figuring out what these are and then having the power to respond in a new way?
I do love journaling, and I have a lot of my clients journal. So yeah, just even asking yourself the question, like, what are my top 5 triggering events? How does my body feel? And then it might take a week to really check in and get clear on how your body does react. What are the thought patterns? What do I typically say to myself when I'm stressed? And how do I typically react? And so, yeah, those can all be journal questions. Another kind of like fun tool is, listeners have probably heard of this, but it can be made humorous and entertaining to label a story or a thought pattern, right? So it's like, naming the voice in your head. If you name it, you can tame it, they say.
Yeah, like Jack Kornfield talks about naming the demons or whatever, right?
Gremlins or inner critic, or, Eckhart Tolle's the pain body, or, Carl Jung is the saboteur. But we can also personalize it and make it kind of fun. I had a client who had this voice in his head that when he would get stressed, it would just create all these scenarios where he would win at all costs. If it required cheating or burning himself out or hurting others, it didn't matter. This voice was trying to talk him into this is being like a good strategy. So he named the voice Lance Armstrong. It's just like wanting to win at all costs, and it was humorous. It was kind of funny that he got to just be like, oh, that's Lance. And by labeling it that, you got some separation from it. It turned it from this subjective, experience of like, yes, that I should do that, to like, oh no, that's just that thought pattern. Another client, I don't know if you'll remember this reference. I didn't at the moment, but he reminded me of the Christmas Story, which is always on TV around the holidays. And the bully's name in the Christmas Story is Scott Farkas. And so he named this inner bully that he had. Whenever he heard the voice or the thought patterns of inner criticism and bullying, he'd be like, that's just Scott Farkas again. And it gave him this distance, but also a way to relate to it with humor rather than beating himself up for beating himself up.
If you're into boho style and ethical gifts, check out SavannahSpirit.com. They have beautiful, flowy clothing and unique finds like Tibetan singing bowls, sage, incense, and mala necklaces. It's a great online shop for the spiritualist. Use the discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. Yeah, and I think a lot of people have this fear that some of these voices, and I'm glad you brought up the bully example, are maybe motivating us, right? It's that voice saying like, hey, get up at 6 a.m. or like glue your butt to the chair and do your work right now. And it's sort of like, how to know? I think people maybe have this fear, or I can definitely relate to this. If you let some of those voices go, it's sort of like, I'm never going to get anything done.
So common. Yeah, so common for high performers. Like this belief that if I didn't beat myself up, that I would never move forward. I see this in weight loss. Clients are trying to make healthy change. They think like, if I were just compassionate to myself, if I were just to accept where I'm at currently before moving forward, then I'm going to weigh 500 pounds. And, and it's a funny belief. And when I usually spell it out for them, they're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so what I have to point out is that there's this belief that the stick is the only way to motivate, right? That like abuse or like this kind of negative pushing, like perfectionism or pushing is the only way to move you forward. People forget that like, no, you can be motivated by a mission, by a vision, because you love yourself so much, you just want to take care of yourself and feed yourself well, right? And this is this intrinsic motivation because it gives you a sense of purpose, because it feels good. Right? These are all, of course, more sustainable motivations than I would say either the stick or the carrot, right? So even reward is a fairly low-level motivation according to self-determination theory, which is the most predominant motivational theory we have right now. It says that reward is going to be, temporary. Once the reward has been had, then the motivation ends. And pain or some kind of a punishment, it might give you some temporary motivation, but ultimately the experience of the journey is not very fun and it doesn't last. So yeah, I definitely spend a lot of time reconditioning people to recognize that beating themselves up is not the only way to motivate.
This idea you share about being motivated by a mission or a vision, that intrinsic motivation, so we move away from carrot and stick, is so appealing. But how do people do that? I mean, do you have any practical tips for listeners?
Yeah, so, it comes from, and this is more of the coaching psychology than it is traditional mindfulness work, but I've really blended the two in my practice. And so really, I think of intentions, a positive vision or goals as being the breath or the mantra, if you will, for life. And so we hold this vision in a really delicate way. And I still try to really help my clients practice non-attachment to it. But I'll ask them, just simple questions like, what do you really want? Why are you here? We can do guided visualization, imagining certain areas of their life if everything were working well. Journaling, again, is a great way to tap into, like, what do I really want? Like, what are my intentions? There's very cliche questions like, if time and money or resources weren't an option, what would you do? All of those work if you really sit down and answer them for yourself. But then once you've clarified what you want, and I actually think that that's not the hardest part, right? People are pretty good when they're really ready to sit down. They can get to that. Then it's like, how do you relate to it? How do you relate to this vision? How do you relate to these goals? And so again, using that metaphor of the breath or the mantra for meditation, as we know, the breath and the mantra are not the point, they're just the vehicle. The point is to be present. The point is to know yourself. And I feel the same way around goals or intentions and vision. Whether you achieve the goal or not, nice if you can, ultimately not the point. Who you are and how you show up in the process of achieving, more the point. The learning that is had along the way, more the point. And then, like in meditation, we recognize that ultimately, even with a strong will to follow the breath or the mantra, the mind wanders. And so we wander from the goals. Usually a client, typical arc of our sessions is they're very motivated. There's a honeymoon phase for the first few weeks. And then, their typical sabotaging behaviors or, life distractions get in the way and they wander away. They forget. They lose the goal, the intention. And so the practice then is to just be like, oh, I've lost the mantra. And we gently bring it back again and again and again and build this kind of muscle, just like we will in meditation, where we can recognize the wandering quicker and quicker and get back on path sooner and sooner.
Say more about the vision as being the breath, and what do you mean by mantra? Because I think you're teaching us something very interesting here, and I want to make sure we're crystal clear. So for example, in a traditional meditation seat, I might sit and say a simple mantra like hum sa, right? With my inhale and exhale, something like that. But I feel like what you're talking about, or what the analogy you're making, is that we could actually think of each breath or have a phrase or a mantra that's related to this vision we're holding, this intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, it's just a metaphor. So no matter what it is you say you want, like having that be at the forefront of your attention, right? Recognizing that throughout the day. So whether it be, to win a game, or whether it be to, practice a certain way at a sport, whether it be to show up a certain way as a parent, right? So for your listeners, just think of whatever it is your main intention is for your life, like whatever your primary goal is. Again, your goal is like the mantra for your life. We keep that front and center. We continue to ask ourselves at every crossroads during the day, what is the action I could take that most aligns with this goal? And then we choose that, right? So that's kind of what I think of when I think of having like the goal as the mantra for your life. It's the forefront. We use it as this North Star. It's directing us. It's this vehicle that moves us through our day or through our phase, like a mantra or the breath does in meditation. It's an anchor. It's a compass. It's just something to come back to, some kind of a foundation.
And this goal, can you give us some examples of what this goal would be? Like, is it a way we want to feel? Or could it be as specific, like you said, the athlete who wants to always win a game?
That's probably not the best example because that's more of an outcome-based goal. But say the athlete wants to, could be any goal, I suppose. It could be get better sleep, improve nutrition in a very specific way. It could be present during a practice.
Perform at my peak or something like that, to the best of my ability. Or
yeah, some kind of an intention that feels relevant for that athlete.
And then thinking about that through the day, using the breath, just like you would a mantra in your meditation.
Yeah, how they actually use it through the day is dependent on them. So we're taking it in a way that is like really practical. And I think when I use that example to my clients, it's more metaphorical. But usually, this is all fleshed out with the client. So I just tell your listeners to get really specific on what their goal, their intent, or their vision is. And I would ask them, what would that mean to you? Like, how would you practice keeping this at the forefront of your attention throughout the entire day? And I'd really trust that their wisdom would know how to put that into practice.
Right, and for some people that might be like a vision board that they're looking at right over their desk, or a myriad of other things that they use. This is cool. I know you wanted to talk and tell us about what you call your 3 key aspects of mindfulness and performance: resilience, focus, and flow. And I definitely want to talk about flow with you, because I think a lot of what we've been circling around is like this idea of when you're not kicking yourself and you're not, just lethargic, you find this like perfect balance, and that's sort of like a flow state. But I know there's some other steps in between. So do you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So we've kind of talked about resilience as we've been talking a little bit about how to work with stress. So because flow seems to be the most interesting right now, let's go straight to that one. And then if we want to get to focus, we can.
And I want to make sure, did we really cover resilience? Is resilience just like that ability to keep coming back that we've been talking about?
Yeah, like the stress resilience specifically is like a stress hardiness, and I would say it's an ability to feel stress, to feel fear, to know it's there, but to move forward anyways, and really to stay present in the face of stress. So we can actually, I will spend a few more moments kind of clarifying that. And so typically stress triggers an unconscious reaction, and so whatever that stress trigger is, whether it be physical, so something like I'm too tired, I'm hurting, I'm hungry or too full, whatever physical trigger it might be. It could be psychological, right? Just too many thoughts, racing mind, an unwanted emotion. Could be social. Somebody says something that you didn't want to hear, but something happens and we perceive this as being threatening. It's often not physically threatening, usually not life-threatening, but more threatening to the ego, to our sense of self, to our reputation. And so we feel this certain threat, like I'm not going to be okay, I'm not safe. This is when the body's flooded with cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine, all those things. It contracts, and we talked about the stress signature. So the heart beats fast, the hands get clammy, the jaw gets tight, the brow furrows, stomach maybe gets a little upset. And then the mind interprets those sensations and tells some kind of story about it, right? We can say it goes into rumination or catastrophizing, all these great things the mind does when it's stressed. And then we'll typically react in some habitual way. And I'll say it's fight, flight, freeze, fix, or fake. So fight is easily recognized as being anger, blame, criticism towards oneself or another. Flight is either zoning out, or it could actually mean a real flight, like leaving a relationship, leaving a job, leaving your hometown. But it could be fleeing into some addictive device, trying to escape reality through a bag of chips, through drugs and alcohol, through mindless television. The freeze reaction is paralysis by analysis. Done a pros and cons list a million times, but just seems stuck, unable to make a decision or to move forward. The fix reaction is kind of a desperate attempt to improve yourself that comes from like a place of feeling not good enough. Like if only I could lose another 20 pounds, then I would be lovable. If only I got a PhD, people think I'm smart, right? So the fix reaction. And the fake reaction, it comes from the fear of being seen as weak, or the desire to be seen as having it all together. By your peers, not wanting to be vulnerable, so like kind of smiling and like, oh, things are great, even when they're clearly not. And so we start to recognize this pattern, but we don't at first. This usually happens instantly, habitually, and unconsciously. So mindfulness helps us to slowly wake up to any step of the way. Ultimately, we want to wake up, like I said, to the impulse of the body, like, oh, there's a stress signature in the body. But sometimes in the beginning of a mindfulness practice, we don't start to recognize stress until like 3 days later when we're sending our apology email, like, oops, I think I did it again, and so that's fair enough. We wake up a few days later, we do damage control, but eventually we want to catch it sooner and sooner until we do no harm. and we don't actually do the thing that causes harm. And so being stress resilient is being able to feel the stress or the fear at its first stage, continue to stay with the vision that we were talking about, stay with the goal, stay with the intention rather than being distracted, because it's what stress or fear that usually sabotages whatever we intend to do. So we learn how to pause whenever we feel the stress. We try to soften the body, shifting our physiology from the fight or flight to the pause in the central nervous system. We might name the stress. I gave examples of like personalized names or more general names like inner critic. And then ultimately we kind of choose a more skillful response in that moment. I guess easy practice is to just notice when someone's stuck in this catastrophizing or rumination and shift into feeling the body. That could be taking a breath. I'll have some clients ask, where are my feet? Just meaning like, just feel your feet, because you can't be fully immersed in the sensations of the feet and also ruminating at the same time. They're two different brain regions. They can toggle pretty quickly, but we can actually train ourselves to sustain more of a sensing mode, which breaks the cycle of habitual thinking. And so these are ways that we become stress resilient. But the first part is just know that it's happening when it's happening. Having awareness.
No, I'm so glad you shared that with us. And I love the fight, freeze, flight, because I think a lot of us know that one, but the fix or fake are really good too. So I'm glad you made us aware of those other two. So we're building this resilience. And then what's next? Focus, flow, where do you want to go?
Yeah, resilience, focus, and flow are the main intention of the programs for the high performers. So when it comes to focused attention, I guess there's two different ways that we can pay attention. One, it would be like this focused, concentrated way, and one is more of an open awareness. And so open awareness is just presence. If focused attention or concentration is metaphorically a laser beam of attention on a chosen object, then open awareness is like the lights are on in the room. You're able to see everything that's happening. And these two are different brain regions, and we can train for both of them. So when it comes to just overall presence or open awareness, what we know is that without training, the average individual is mind wandering 47% of the time, says a study that got a lot of publicity in a TED Talk and all that by Killingsworth and Gilbert. And so what they also found was that when we're mind wandering, we're much less happy than when we're present to whatever we're doing. What we also know is that we can't really multitask, right? So there's this myth that we can hold two things in attention at the same time. But really what we do is inefficiently toggle between activities. And what studies show is that are much more productive and efficient when we just choose one object or one task and do it fully with full presence. So focused attention, this can be built by awareness of breath. Right, being more present, just choosing an object like the breath in meditation, we know builds this certain brain region. But this can be done informally as well. So if I'm going to check emails and I want to get to an empty inbox, well, I can start banging away on emails, having that be the focus of my attention. And then when my mind wanders and says, oh, maybe I'll go have a snack, maybe I need to take a walk, I'll think, I'll check in. Nope, distraction. And I'll bring it back to the next email. All right, so even that can be a mindfulness practice, mindful email checking, where we continue to stay committed to a focused object. This mindfulness practice where we train our attention to stay in the present moment and then specifically to stay on a chosen object has also been proven in different research. Interesting, they'll have it's what's called the attentional blink. And so mindfulness practitioners have less attentional blink. The way they test this is that they will have study participants sit in front of something that like this, I guess, random number generator. They'll say, like, count the sixes. They'll have certain colors, count how many times red comes up, count how many times there's one straw that's shorter than the other. Silly things, but then they start to do these really fast. And the group that has practiced mindfulness is more accurate with, say, counting how many sixes pop up within a period of time than the non-mindfulness groups. The reason being is they have less attentional blink. That's the moment the mind just kind of goes offline And this happens throughout the day. We've all experienced it. Reading a page in a book, you get to the end of a paragraph and you're like, I have no idea what I just read. Right? It's an attentional blink. And so mindfulness trains us to have less of those attentional blinks, more presence, more focused attention.
If you love crystals as much as I do, check out savannahspirit.com. They have a range of gorgeous raw crystals, as well as rolled gemstones, pyramids, and crystal jewelry. The best part, you can use the discount code podcast30 for 30% off your first order today. I love the example you gave of email, because I think so many of us believe that, either we need to be sitting in a meditation seat to practice mindfulness, or yes, we can practice mindfulness, but it's when we do things that are kind of physical and sensory, like that example of when you're washing the dishes or, sipping the perfect cup of coffee or moments like that. But what you're inviting in is this idea that even something like trying to get your inbox decluttered, if it's the only thing you're focused on, and anytime a distraction appears, you stay focused on that task, that is also mindfulness.
Yeah, any task that you focus on and really set a firm intention, I'm going to do this for this long, or I'm going to do it until it's complete, and then you notice the wandering or distracting of the mind and bring it back to that task, is an informal mindfulness practice.
Yeah, it's a choice to stay committed. I love it. And then is that what gets us into flow?
So flow is a unique state, and I would say that it primes us for flow. And so they say that enlightenment is an accident, meditation makes you accident prone. I say the same thing for flow. It's like flow is an accident, meditation makes you accident prone. We can't force ourselves to go into flow. It's something we're almost invited into. It just arises as a state, the state of optimal performance, a state of immersion. And what we do know is that we can set the stage through mindfulness. So one thing I already mentioned is this balanced effort. So what we know is that when you're taking on something that's greater than your ability, so whether that be too many things on the schedule, or whether it be a simple example could be lifting weights. If you know that you can lift 35 pounds, the 60 pounds is going to be overwhelming. 15 pounds might be boring, but maybe 35 to 37 is going to put you right in the zone. And so we can do the same thing with how much we take on in our schedule, how much effort we exert. And again, we check in with the body and we recognize what our ability is and how much we can take on. And when we can find that sweet spot where our challenge is just a little bit greater than our skill or ability, we know that increases the likelihood of flow. So I can help my clients to set goals, like the right amount that they'll take on that will encourage flow. And then they can also check in with their body, really monitoring energy so that they can be more likely to achieve flow. We also know that one of the flow conditions is being out of the mind and in the body. So flow is associated with this thoughtlessness. And what we know is that the default mode network in the brain is what is correlated to rumination and mind wandering. What we know is that meditators show on brain scans less activity in the default mode network, meaning less mind wandering and less rumination, basically less narrating what's happening in the moment and more fully just experiencing what's happening in the moment. And so meditation can prime flow by getting us out of the mind, out of the narration or out of the mind wandering and into the body. What we know is that when you're more embodied, that the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula are the brain regions that are online. These are the regions responsible for what's called interoceptive awareness, like subtle body energy, subtle body sensations. And interoceptive awareness is correlated with flow and also with resilience. And we know that meditation improves the areas of the brain responsible for interoceptive awareness. So we're indirectly training for the conditions that would invite flow states into our life.
That's wonderful. I love it. And before we let you go and we move to the end, there's something I want to ask you because, and I'm wondering if, just in case people are listening at home and wondering this too, I love how we started with this idea of balanced effort. And I want to make sure we're all really clear about how we practice that balanced effort when we're doing our focus work, right? So like if I'm, 30 minutes timer doing the emails, responding to all the ones that I have to and don't want to, and I'm committing to that as my focus, how do you bring in the balanced effort into that if it feels like striving or it feels like I'm having to push myself to do it?
There's ultimately a point where we become less effective. And again, the better we are at really tuning in to our experience, the easier it is to catch that. But finding, your own balanced effort comes from your own body wisdom. So there might be this zone of like, well, I can hold attention on email checking for 30 minutes where I feel uber productive. Then I've got another 7 minutes where typically, depending on how much coffee I drank and, whatever the conditions of while I slept, maybe I can get 7 more minutes that are semi-focused, and then I'm just falling apart after that. Okay, well, that lets us know something. So yeah, good point. We don't want to be like, I'm going to do 9 hours of email checking. That wouldn't be reasonable. It wouldn't inspire flow. You're not.
Yeah, this balanced effort, it seems like it's like you have to set yourself up for success, right? You can't have these like unrealistic goals for your time where you're practicing the focus piece of the puzzle. You have to be realistic and kind to yourself when setting those up.
Yeah, know where you're at. And, it's the same with meditation. And it's probably with yoga as well, where, maybe you can start off and you can do a half an hour asana, and that feels about right. Or you can do a certain poses, but not others. And then slowly you feel your way into the readiness, and you really trust your own wisdom to know when I can go from one pose to its next expression, when I can go a little bit deeper, or when I can go from a 60-minute to a 90-minute flow, or when I can heat it up. Right, but to really check in, to feel and trust that your body's ready and that your mind is ready for what you're giving it, and letting go of the expectations of what you think you should be doing because of what other people can do. Well, so and so can check emails for 9 hours, right? Well, I can do a half an hour.
Right, and I think that the other tricky piece of this puzzle is it's something we constantly have to revise because the conditions of life are always changing, right? Whether we're entering into a new season or we've traveled or we're jet lagged, or right? It's like all of a sudden your standards of what you can do it's a constant flux. So you need to be doing that constant check-in because even it's like once you figure it out, change is the only constant, right? So you're always needing to redefine like what it is you can do moment to moment, day by day. Pete, this has been such a pleasure to chat with you. I know I've been inspired with so many actionable tips, and I hope people listening have it as well. How can people stay connected with you and either take some of your courses or just find you online?
Yeah, so my website's the easiest way. I've got everything that I'm offering, including my MPEAK course for mindful performers that's out of the UCSD Center for Mindfulness, my mindfulness-based stress reduction courses, which are offered in San Diego, private coaching, which can be done in person, but I have clients from around the country and around the world that can be done as we're doing via Zoom or Skype. And all of that information is at www.mindfulnessbasedhealth.com.
Perfect. So we'll put that link right below the episode wherever you are listening. And listeners, thank you so much for staying with us all the way to the very end. As always, I cherish your feedback. So let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can let me know in our private Facebook group, savannaheast.com/group is going to redirect you. And remember that your ratings and reviews here on iTunes make a huge difference. They mean the world to me and they help more people find the show. So if you haven't taken a moment to leave a rating or review for us here on iTunes, please take a quick second to do that today. I hope you have a beautiful day full of yoga, meditation, and maybe incorporating some of these new mindfulness tips we learned from Pete too. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.